So this is the iPhone 8, Apple's shadow phone to the original notched iPhone back in 2017. And while it was definitely initially overshadowed, it quickly became a pretty popular phone. So, all these years later, is it still worth your money in 2021? Let's find out. First off, as usual, we're going to be talking about the specs. The iPhone 8 is rocking an Apple A11 processor, 2GB of RAM, which isn't a lot for 2021, but we'll talk more about actual performance later on. Either 64, 128, or 256GB of internal storage, of which I have the 64GB variant, as I don't really need anything else, but it's nice to know that you can upgrade if you need to. There's also multiple color options. We got black, white, and my personal favorite color on any iPhone, this gold color. It's a nice blend of rose gold and traditional gold, and while I'm aware this is all preference, I still really like this color. It weighs in at 148 grams, which is pretty light for a modern smartphone, and it has a battery size of 1,821 milliamp hours. As for key specs, that's pretty much it. We are going to be going into more detail as well as have some extra specs in sections like the screen later on, but that's pretty much it for the key specs. After this, we have the design and build quality, which, to be totally honest, I kinda love. This is the best version of one of the best design series of iPhones, in my opinion, taking what was already great about the iPhone 7, so the nice size and the 7000 series aluminium bezel, and adding a glass back for that overall increased premium feeling. This does, however, mean that it's going to be a bit more breakable than it was before, which isn't good, but in my time using it without a case, I haven't actually had any issues. It does also have an IP67 water resistance rating, meaning it can survive in up to a meter of water for 30 minutes, which is a nice failsafe in my opinion. And while the home button look and the 16:9 screen can make this phone look a little bit dated now, in my opinion, the design still holds strong. One final thing is definitely with the camera. Throughout my usage, I've noticed a lot less scratching happening around the camera lens than with phones like my iPhone 7. Now, this may just be my use case, but nevertheless, it's something that I've picked up on. And again, despite the lens sticking out, I haven't had any issues with it getting scratched. So yeah, pretty good. Next up, we have the screen, which, to be honest, on paper, really isn't that good, especially for 2021. It features a 4.7-inch screen with a resolution of 750 by 1334, a typical brightness of 625 nits, and a PPI of 326, which is very common with this design generation of iPhones. Honestly though, the biggest bother to me about the iPhone 8 is the aspect ratio. The lower resolution and screen size really aren't an issue for me. As someone with pretty small hands, smaller phone screens have never really been an issue for me, and due to this, you really don't notice that lower screen resolution. However, it must be said, I personally do still prefer the notched line of iPhones when it comes to aspect ratio. The brightness also isn't really an issue for me either. Even on bright days, I've had no real issues. The iPhone 8 was also the first iPhone to feature True Tone, which essentially analyzes the light color in your surroundings and matches your iPhone display to that temperature. This means that your colors always look nice and natural, and this quickly became one of my favorite features on the iPhone line. The iPhone 8 also features 3D Touch as the secondary interaction method, which is the pressure-based version versus the newer time-based haptic touch. Honestly, I still prefer this, and while haptic touch is very good nowadays and 3D Touch feels much less tactile than it used to thanks to software updates to bridge the two, I still, on principle of how cool the technologies are, still prefer 3D Touch. Overall, while dated, so long as you can deal with things like the smaller size, features like True Tone keep the iPhone 8 screen feeling fresh, and for the price you can get this phone for in 2021, I'm really not going to complain all that much. After this, we have the button layout, which is the best version of what I personally think is the best button layout on any iPhone. You get the isolated lock button, which doesn't have a load of bindings to it like it does on the notched line, as well as separate volume up and down buttons, a mute switch, and a home button. Everything feels nice and tactile with the inclusion of the home button, despite it not actually being a physical button, which we are going to be talking about next, but overall, the button configurations feel nice and just make sense. Oh yeah, and no accidental screenshots like I occasionally get on some notched iPhones. always a positive. All in all, yeah, I like the button layout. After this, we have the home button and Touch ID. At first glance, this does kind of make the iPhone 8 look a little dated. However, if you like the Touch ID system, this is pretty much the best you can get other than with that new SE, which again, we are going to be talking about in a bit too. As it's not a physical button, you can actually adjust the tactility with 3 different settings. I personally like number 3 as this feels the most clicky. Coincidentally, this is the same setting that I use on my MacBook trackpad, as it just helps it feel that much more real. In terms of Touch ID, well, you may occasionally have some issues, especially if you didn't get a good scan. Provided that you set this up properly, this thing will be very accurate, very snappy, and while not always as convenient or flashy as Face ID, definitely gets the job done. Seriously though, if you're having issues with Touch ID, try rescanning your finger. Often, that's the issue. Alright, so next up, we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite things to talk about, the camera. The iPhone 8 features a single f1.8 12 megapixel camera, along with a 7 megapixel f2.2 front-facing camera. And while none of this may sound particularly incredible on paper, let's take a look at the images. As we can see from these photos, the iPhone 8 has a nice amount of sharpness, saturation, and dynamic range. I find that this lens is the perfect focal length to be a great all-rounder. In terms of photo performance on the front-facing camera, really, there's not all that much I can say. It takes nice selfies, skin tones look good, and again, it's a nice focal length. Okay, so photos, fine, but what about the video performance? Moving on to video performance, the iPhone 8 shoots 4K at up to 60 FPS, which was a nice upgrade from the 30 FPS on the iPhone 7, because as some of you may know, I personally really like shooting in 4K 60 FPS, then slowing it down to 24 FPS, and you got some nice smooth video. Again, it now also shoots in 1080p in 240 FPS, which is a nice upgrade again coming from the iPhone 7. That said, I still personally don't think the 240 FPS looks very good. I personally just keep it in 120 FPS because I think this is a nice blend of slow motion and quality, but it's still nice to have the option. We get 1080p at up to 60 FPS on the front-facing camera, very similar to the iPhone 10 here. And well, if you do want quality, I would personally recommend just flipping your phone around and using the main camera for just some quick vlogging action or social media. The front-facing camera does fine. Overall, well, it can look a little bit dated in 2021 with the single focal length camera, no crazy technology like night mode or even portrait mode. The iPhone 8 can still be used to take some pretty phenomenal pictures. And honestly, I think most people don't really need all those new features, so if you just want to take some casual photos for social media or fun, then the iPhone 8 should do just fine. Following this, we have arguably the most important aspect of any modern smartphone, the OS and app performance. The iPhone 8 was released with iOS 11, and while I've always assumed 5 years, the iPhone 6s threw all of that off by getting a stunning 7 years of support, so that's kind of neat. Due to it being released in 2017, I would predict this thing still has plenty of life left in it, which is one of the things I really like about iPhones. Scrolling through the OS is smooth, performing secondary interactions is great, and overall, OS performance is pretty fantastic on iOS 14. In terms of more intensive performance, I haven't had any issues watching high-resolution videos, and casual gaming has been good. In terms of high-performance gaming, this thing does just fine. However, you may want to look into something a little bit newer and higher spec like the iPhone 10 or the iPhone SE. Overall, the performance on the iPhone 8 will certainly be good enough for most people to do some media consumption, casual gaming, and throughout my testing period, I never found myself wanting more. Going back to the hardware quickly, let's talk about the speakers. The iPhone 8 again uses that stereo technology that was first introduced on the iPhone 7, which essentially uses both the top and bottom speaker to create a wider, more immersive sound. And while it was occasionally a little bit shaky on the iPhone 7, I think the iPhone 8 really perfected this technology, which is nice. And while it's certainly not as good as something like an iPhone 11 or 12, it certainly gets the job done for some casual listening. Whether that be music or watching a video while you're cooking, I very rarely find myself having trouble with the speakers on the iPhone 8. And hey, you can always plug in some headphones if you need it. Finally, we have the battery life. As we previously talked about in the spec section of this video, the iPhone 8 features a battery size of 1,821 mAh, which, to be honest, isn't all that impressive in 2021. That said, I've generally found iPhone 8 battery life to be very dependent on what I'm doing. If it's a media heavy morning, I better be prepared to charge it by lunch. But in my personal everyday usage, I rarely have to charge it before 5 PM. Realistically though, if battery life is very important for you, the iPhone 8 probably won't be a great fit. But if you're either a casual user or prepared to regularly charge your phone, realistically, it shouldn't be too bad. Okay, so what do I think of this phone, and who should buy it in 2021? Should anyone buy it in 2021? Honestly, I think the iPhone 8 is still a pretty spot-on budget phone. If you're teetering on the edge of whether or not to switch to iPhone and you just want to try it but you don't want to splash out over $1,000 on a brand new iPhone, then picking up a used iPhone 8 could be the perfect in point. Or if you want to upgrade from something like an iPhone 5S but you again don't want to spend a ton of money, then the iPhone 8 can be a pretty great option. That said though, if you want things like longer term support, so 4 years, and maybe things like a better camera and a better battery, then I personally recommend checking out either the iPhone SE 2020, which is a phenomenal budget phone again, or something like the iPhone 10. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, do you own an iPhone 8? Do you plan to buy one? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading those. As for now though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video. If you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. If you want to help support the show, then feel free to check out my Patreon. Maybe if you're that way inclined, check out the socials. As for now though, I'm done, and I will see you guys in the next one.